Well, tell me a little bit about yourself and your background in IoT.
Well, I'm Sid Hoda. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer of ParStream. We're an IoT analytics company. We help companies generate value from all the data coming from sensors. IoT is a passion of mine. I've spent years in IoT. Prior to ParStream, I worked at Cisco. And about 7, 8 years ago, I started with a little initiative in Asia called Intelligent Urbanization, which later morphed into IoE, Internet of Everything.
Right.
And so I've been passionate about this for years, IoT, IoE, because I've also spent most of my career at the intersection of technology and business. And IoT is the poster child of that intersection, right? That's exactly where IoT lives.
Why do you say that? That's intriguing.
Well, because it's all about a combination of data and things, and then learning about those things and what you can do with those things to make them faster, make them more efficient, make them higher quality. So IoT is really about that intersection, right? That's the trend that most deeply goes into that intersection more than anything else we've ever seen before.
Now, I noticed you don't say IoE. So, what's your view on IoE now that you're no longer at Cisco?
Well, IoE is a little bit of a marketing term. At the end of the day, they're very intertwined. IoE refers to more stuff, right? IoT's things. The E includes people.
Ah, okay.
Right, and so but in general, we're talking IoE, IoT are very similar concepts, and so I kind of use them back and forth synonymously.
Well, let's get to your expertise.
Mm-hmm.
Can you define? I want a high-level definition of big data. What's big data?
Got it. Good question. So, big data was coined back in '97 by NASA. And
I did not know that.
Yeah, so what they called big data, the amount of data that was too big for their operational systems to handle when they were visualizing various images in space and beyond. So big data referred to when there's so much data we can't handle it.
Okay.
Now that still exists today. IoT data is exactly the same thing, right? It's more data than we're ever been used to. It's faster and more widely distributed. So our infrastructure isn't ready to handle that. So big data has two definitions. One is simply a lot of data, more than you can handle. But the other definition people confuse is they use words like tera or peta.
Right.
Now, that is an evolving definition. What used to be a lot of data 20 years ago is not much data anymore, right?
Right, sure.
Terabytes used to mean a lot of data.
Yeah.
Now we're starting there.
What is a lot of data now measured in? What's the prefix?
It depends who you ask, right? If you ask an oil and gas company, then petabytes.
Okay.
Right? If you ask a retailer, then maybe it is terabytes.
Yeah, right.
Right? So it depends on the use case, but the main point is that it's a moving target. What used to be a lot yesterday is not much today, and tomorrow will be even much greater. So now we're talking about petabytes. We'll talk about zettabytes later on. In IoT in particular, it's growing at about 10x what normal data is growing. And so IoT in particular, because of more sensors, cheaper sensors on more things, and collecting data faster, there's way more than there used to be. So someday we'll think petabytes are nothing.
Okay, so big data, number one is the size, and what's number two definition?
Well, it's the ability to handle it, right? It's a lot of data and beyond the capabilities that your systems can handle and absorb in the memory and the disk. And that's how NASA defined it. It was more data, whatever that amount is, than we can normally operationally handle to get value from it.
Okay, so in the memory and the disks,
yes,
that's the two areas.
Right.
So that brings up a good question then. What would be the relationship between an analytics system and a database? I mean, what's the relationship there?
I view a database as the engine. So I'm a car guy. I'll give you a car example. The database is the engine of the car. The analytics are the transmission, the steering wheel, the various other instruments.
Okay.
The engine is the soul of the car. There are cars that are named after the model of engine, right, that they have.
Right.
Without that engine, everything else sort of becomes not so exciting anymore. Now, the analytics are important because if you have a great engine, you also need great transmission and steering wheel and various components to fully exploit that engine.
Okay.
Very similar. The database is the soul. The analytics take advantage of the soul and extract information, but you got to have the engine being the foundation.
Now, can you separate the two? I mean, is all analytics kind of related to one database, for example, or I mean, can, is the analytics specifically the big analytics? Is it done right on the database, or can it be separated? Tell me about that.
Well, the database is where the data exists,
right,
and gets ingested and processed. But what we're finding out is that with IoT especially, one database isn't enough.
Okay.
Use cases drive the databases, and as well as the other infrastructure. In the past, systems were built on something called general purpose databases. They could do everything decently well. But
like
now,
a SQL kind of
exactly,
database?
right. Transactional databases that kept records of people's addresses and phone numbers, etc. Now we have data coming in at very high speeds and the need to analyze it very quickly. And so what we're finding is companies need more than one flavor. You need transactional databases that run your billing systems and operational systems, and you need analytical databases that help you analyze and extract value from data.
Okay.
And they coexist.
And now for the analytics, so is it just, again, one database within analytics that you work on? I mean, or is it in different places, or what's the relationship there?
Multiple. So we happen to have invented our own database, patented technology. But even in IoT, you have batch use cases.
Yep.
So Hadoop is a really good batch use case database, but not for real time. So you have use cases in IoT that are very time critical, where you extract information and within seconds or minutes you have to make a decision and do something, and some that you analyze information and tomorrow you do something about it. So even with IoT and analytics, you might have a batch-oriented technology and a real-time technology.
Okay. But given the fact that you invented your own database and you're an analytics company, that would imply there's a pretty tight relationship there.
Very tight.
Yeah.
To fully exploit it, you have to really be able to take advantage of the speed and size. But no, we don't, again, our sole, the database we have some analytics, but we have partners that actually take advantage of it as well. So we have our foundation and other companies, partners like ThingWorks and other companies that have fabulous technologies will then sit on top of our technology. And that's what we're seeing now. We're seeing a relationship between different analytical tools and different databases coming together.
So what would be the example of different databases, though? Because the analytics, I thought, was really tied to that database.
Yes. Well, you might have visualization tools, for example, that create very interesting...
so you'd shift the data over to another place?
You might have certain use cases sending data over to this database that are batch use cases, and some over here that are more real-time. So it depends on the use case. You may have two different databases, maybe one visualization engine that perhaps uses both. There are transactional databases that are very focused more on day-to-day transactions versus analytics. So
for IoT, you mean?
It could be for IoT or beyond, right?
Okay.
So the use cases define the database. The visualization tools could cover multiple flavors, and they do, right? But where your data gets ingested and analyzed very much depends on what the use case is. And hence you have Hadoop, which is a very good batch-oriented system. You have companies like ParStream that are very much real-time and speed-oriented.
Okay, so depending on your use case, then you would choose a database that would match the type of analytics that you're in requirement of.
Exactly. The size of data and the speed of data and the immediacy of the actionable insights. How fast do you have to know something to generate value? Is it seconds or is it days or hours? And that also dictates it.
Now, when you pick a database, are you indirectly picking your analytics capabilities?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. There are tools that go across multiple different flavors, as databases do as well, right? We have one database, but we have different tools that work on top of us. And so it works both ways.
So something you haven't mentioned is cloud. So what's the relationship between analytics and, say, an IoT cloud service?
It's a very popular combination these days. There are a lot of companies offering analytics in the cloud. The important part there is that you have to be able to deliver a flexible infrastructure depending on the use case. So for example, you might have a database and analytics on-premise, in the cloud, or at the edge. Right? It's really about what does the use case demand in terms of analytical capabilities? If you think about wind turbines and thousands of wind turbines located in a remote area, you want to bring analytics close to those turbines because that's where the action is, where the data is. Sending data over an infrastructure from a remote location is expensive and slow sometimes. And so therefore edge analytics becomes very, very important. Cloud has a play as well. Sometimes you have use cases where you want the data to sit somewhere centrally in a cloud where many others can access the same thing.
Right.
Or on premise, where there are certain, for security reasons or whatever, there are reasons why you want to have it on premise. So the main point is, don't worry about whether it's cloud or not. Worry about the use case. Let the use case define where the analytic capabilities and data should reside.
Okay.
And very often it's a combination of multiple flavors.
Multiple flavors. And I mean, just not to belabor the point, but would the cloud also be used for heavy lifting if it's that type of analytics that you require?
It very well could be. It could be. You know, the cloud, of course, has a lot of storage space. It's not expensive.
And
but
computing power.
Yeah, absolutely. So cloud is a great option. We have customers using both cloud deployments as well as on-premise. And it all comes back to, what is the use case? What are you trying to do with the data? Because, and so the message for companies who are building solutions is that you have to have all the above. You have to have a flavor that includes a cloud option as well as an on-premise option, because customers are choosing whatever is right for their use case.
Let's shift, what they're using it for. What's your recommendation? I know it's a pretty open-ended question, but what's your recommendation to generate more value out of the data that you have? You're an analytics company, so what have you seen? What's your recommendations?
Okay, good question. It's a combination of many factors. First of all, companies have to become passionate about data and using data as a competitive advantage.
Who isn't?
Well, it's easily said, right, versus done. So what's really important is that data gets treated in a way that a company looks at it as a way to become more competitive. So number one, it's got to be ingrained in the culture, a data culture, because that breeds certain behaviors. So one, you have to be passionate about data. Then that helps you ask the right questions. We did a major global survey around this. We found that companies are still struggling with asking the right questions. Once you know the questions you want to ask, now you know the kind of infrastructure you need to support your queries, to support your analytics.
What are some examples of questions that you should be asking them?
Well, this is, of course, very specific to any company, but it's not just who's buying stuff, but who's not buying stuff, and why not, and when. So very often companies focus on when sales happen, when things are successful, but not often on when things are not successful, right? And so by analyzing a lot of data and more data more often, you learn how to ask the right questions. And it very much depends on the use case. For example, right now, predictive maintenance is one of the hot use cases going on in industrial internet. So with that, you have to start learning about not just when things break down, but when they're working well, why they're working well. And so you have to really broaden your view. And the only way you do that is by analyzing more data, more often, and start learning what data is important, what's not important. So therefore, one, become passionate about data, build an infrastructure that supports the kind of questions you have, the real-time needs or beyond, right? But then what it's all about are actionable insights. At the end of the day, data that gives you interesting perspectives that you can't act on is academically interesting and financially useless. So the real key is being able to extract value to act on it. Every piece of data has a shelf life. Some data has tremendous value for a few seconds and then becomes zero, and some for a few hours, some for a few days. So depending on the data, can you act on it and be able to extract value or not? That's really the key. And so time does matter. What matters also are be able to connect insights to actions. So it's a combination of people, process, technology, not a new thing.
Not a new thing. And I think maybe, Sid, I'd go even further to say that more than being data-centric, I believe that data is the absolute value of incremental value of any IoT company.
Yes.
You have to be 100% focused on it. You need to plan it, like you're saying.
Yes.
What are the questions you need answers to that you can't get in any other way, and then transform that into value, because that is the value. I mean, the data has to be transformed, but that is the value.
One of the newest best friends of the CEO is the chief scientist of data.
Okay.
I'm seeing so many examples of CEOs finding a really smart data scientist and saying, hey, come sit near me and let me ask you some questions and help me even ask the questions and figure out what do we know, what we don't know. So we're seeing a lot of that happen. And in fact, some of the world's great companies, if you ask them, what business are you in? They'll say, we're in the business of information. We know when products move from A to B. We know when someone walks into our store, our airplane, you name it. They know what's going on, can react faster, they sense and respond more effectively. And so you're absolutely right. The best companies in the world know this, are acting on this, and they're the first ones to actually innovate sooner. The rich will get richer, frankly.
Yeah, and they'll be able to iterate on that information
Yes.
much quicker.
Yes,
Product
absolutely.
design cycles, when you have all that data, become infinitely quicker.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. There's a very famous case study back in the 80s. There's a new thing called frequent flyer programs. Remember those? The first chief of strategy that started it was a guy named Max Hopper, American Airlines. And he said, I could give my system to any airline in the world, and they will not extract even 1/3 the value we get from it. We know how to get the data, we know how to use the data. And they were a pioneer in that example. And so it really is true that it's part of a company's culture and ingrained in how they actually operate data.
Excellent, excellent. Well, Sid, can you give us, our viewers, where can they find out more about yourself, your company? Where should they go?
Great, thank you. ParStream.com is our website. At ParStream is our Twitter handle,
Okay.
and I'm at SHODA, at Shoda on Twitter as well. And both ParStream and my handle, we tweet lots of thought leadership. We tweet lots of interesting events or articles people could be reading to learn more about this. I think one thing interesting for your viewers would be to go to our website and download an IoT Global Survey we just released this past month. A global survey, a combination of business, technology leaders, cross-functional, cross-industry. What is going on with IoT and big data? What are the intersection points? What's going well? What's been tough? So there's a free survey online. Go to our website, download the survey. I think some pretty insightful perspectives.
Awesome. I'm going to get it myself. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.